Cities, presented by Omidyar Network India. Indian Express Think is a thought provoking forum that brings together thought leaders, policy makers, and corporate leaders to encourage a substantive exchange of ideas and get the best minds to give it direction and solutions. The series will center on the holistic perspective of urbanization in India. I'm delighted to share a glimpse about this session. I request the team to kindly play the AV, please. Can we have the audio visual, please, for the session?
India is on the brink of a transformative urban evolution. With only 31% of the population residing in cities, according to the 2011 census, the need for focused urban development to unlock India's full potential is undeniable. The World Bank predicts over 600 million urban residents by 2036. But without proper governance, this surge could strain infrastructure, worsen climate issues, and affect city living. To achieve the ambitious goal of cities contributing 75% of India's GDP by 2030, effective governance is crucial to foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and job creation. India requires $840 billion by 2036 to adequately invest in urban infrastructure. Additionally, cities across India need an estimated $1.2 trillion in capital funding by 2030 to meet the demands of their burgeoning populations. Developing affordable housing and expanding access to basic amenities, healthcare, education, and a clean environment for all residents are crucial to enhancing overall quality of life. What can Indian cities learn from the global experience to become better governed? What lessons can Indian cities draw from our own experience? Does the solution require minor legislative changes, or are deep structural changes needed? To make sense of India's urbanization, the Indian Express and the Omidyar Network India present the Indian Express Think series focused on our cities. The first session focuses on bringing greater accountability into my city's governance. Keynote speaker N.K. Singh, Chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission and President of the Institute of Economic Growth, and panelists
Thank you so much, team, for that extremely informative and insightful presentation, insightful AV. Well, today's session will host a special keynote address by Mr. N.K. Singh, Chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission and President of the Institute of Economic Growth, followed by an insightful panel discussion. The session is live on social media handles of the Indian Express also. So let us all welcome Mr. N.K. Singh. Thank you so much, sir. It is our extreme pleasure to have you here with us today.
Give me a minute. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Mr. N.K. Singh doesn't need much of an introduction, but nevertheless, I must say that I must thank him first to agree to come and deliver the keynote address. Given the arc of Mr. Singh's experience as a bureaucrat, 1965 batch, to an economist, to an advisor to the government, to a lawmaker, and then chair of the 15th Finance Commission, and then to chair the G20 expert group on reforms in multilateral development banks. Mr. Singh has seen it all, and I think, to talk about the political and economic imperatives of governance in cities, I don't think there is any other person, because, as chair of the Finance Commission, he has seen how to kind of allocate resources. He has been an able arbiter to say on financial resource allocation between states and center, and also across the three tiers of India's government structure, state, center, as well as the panchayat, local body levels. And again, as co-chair, along with Larry Summers, Mr. Singh actually submitted 2 reports to the G20 leaders on how finance generation itself is a key issue at the global level, and then we all understand the constraints that city administrations face. But nevertheless, thank you, Mr. Singh, for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote address. May I please request you to come? Would you like to speak here?
Well, good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I'm most grateful to the Indian Express, which is always exceptionally kind to me, if I may say that, to be able to have me on so many special occasions and to really enable me to renew my long association with the Indian Express. Of course, most of you know that for a long time I was a regular columnist of this very, very prestigious newspaper, having had the opportunity of writing every Sunday over 4 or 5 years before I got involved in things like the Finance Commission, in which I had to really give up this activity. So thank you to Raj, thank you Vaidi, for allowing me this opportunity to renew my long association with the Indian Express, which I value very greatly. Thank you also for this opportunity for starting this the series on the urban sector, on urbanization, on some proximate challenges, and on some long-term issues. You want me to focus today on the regulatory issues, which to some extent I'm sure it relates to really the third tier of government, which you alluded to in your observations. I will make only 5 very brief points, because I realize that you have indeed a very, very distinguished panel, all of whom are really domain experts in multiple ways. So let me make 5 very broad observations. And to some extent, my first observation has a little proximate bias. I've just come back from Dubai 3 days ago, where I was a panelist along with many others on what multilateral development banks can do in multiple ways, along with every head of multilateral development bank, including Banga and President ADB. But while in Dubai, one is constantly, naturally reminded of these powerful words: energy intensity, emission, and the environmental consequences of many of the activities. And indeed, one of the most interesting sessions that I attended was a late evening session on the science, economics, and politics of carbon capture. And it's quite a fascinating subject on which we need to mainstream those if we want to really go forward, because we cannot get away from that issue. I'll talk on that if the time permits, but let me make the first broad observation that I totally agree that whatever be the data of 2011, the actual pace of urbanization and the number of people living in the urban sector is significantly higher than the figure which was presented in this slide. And if really contemporary data is to go by, not only based on 2021 census, which whose outcomes more or less we know, but going forward, let us say if it's projected by 2050, 50% of India's population lives in the urban sector, you can then see where the numbers will look in 20, 30 years from now. And how does one plan in an orderly way in which the different tiers and layers of government become partners and begin to act in congruence with each other? Also, I think that going back to the first question which I raised, if 50% of India's population lives in the urban sector by 2050, and if urbanization has multiplier effects on growth and therefore on GDP and all the other favorable consequences, what is the likely adverse footprint of this pace of urbanization on levels of emission which will be inevitable? I was trying to read some literature on the relationship between emissions and urbanization. And it is not to be very surprising that the relationship is far more adverse in developing and emerging economies than economies which have become really mature and have become developed economies. So whatever be that figure, if there is a relationship between the pace of urbanization and the pace of emission, then the first challenge is regulatory institutions, systems, which can really find a most optimal solution between the challenges of urbanization and the challenges of emission. Between how does one balance the compulsions of environment with the compulsions of growth. And I think that we need to go more into the evolving science. For instance, this presentation that was made to me was that if, let us say, for urbanization, if you are going to really use the traditional fossil fuel embedded materials, which is a lot of steel and cement, then what, in spite of the dramatic changes in the efficiency and cost of steel and cement making, you would add very substantially to the cost of even low urban class housing and other infrastructure. So this is an area on which much more research needs to be done to find the most efficient optimal mix for a country like India, which is inevitably proceeding on this space of inevitable urbanization with its growth multipliers. I'll leave that subject there. So that was the first question. The second question which I wish to raise is the issue that I dealt with intensively in the 15th Finance Commission. Namely, that having regarded that urbanization has a high multiplier in terms as acting as a growth engine, which we all know, I did several things. I did a rebalancing between urban and rural by giving somewhat greater weightage to the urban than the rural, slightly recalibrating what I had inherited. But beyond that, I did also the somewhat audacious step, which I'll come to, by assigning for the third tier significantly about close to 5 lakh crores, which I was not compelled to, nor was I constitutionally obliged to. But that issue I'll come in a second. But as far as coming back to what I did, as far as the urbanization is concerned, looking at cities which were million plus, the Challenges Fund, which is a Swiss Challenge Fund, where ambient air quality was given a high weightage of 1 million plus city, and then of course the other two tiers. I was hoping to see an annual report card on whether on ambient air quality it has made any difference whatsoever. Living as many of us do in Delhi, it's unlikely we will come to a very positive conclusion that anything much has been done in the utilizing those resources for ambient air quality. Maybe those resources were far too minor. I do not know how far and how successful this experiment of a Swiss Challenge Fund has really proved, but that's something on which we need to do more. I had also assigned that, looking at the fact of the pandemic, that we need to have greater dispersal of cities, and had provided 8,000 crores with each comparative bid of no more than 1,000 crore by way of a seed capital for 8 new nascent cities to come up in India, which would to some extent ease the congestion. And I'm happy that I have been told that a lot of work has done on this, and I will look forward to that work being assigned to the states or to those who have bid for that. We'll watch for that. But the more fundamental issue I want to raise in the context of the third tier, first and foremost, it is with some disappointment we all know that the true full letter and spirit of what was provided in the 2 constitutional amendments have yet to be fully implemented. This is because the obligation of the state to constitute the State Finance Commission was observed as much in breach as in compliance. Now, given the fact that I have made that an important performance criteria, that the audited accounts being loaded and the need to have a reserve property tax, which is a performance criteria indexed to the rate of growth of state GSDP. I hope that some progress comes on that. But that allows me to raise one very important issue. As I go forward, I find that one of the very big challenges that the third tier will face is a paucity of resources. Where is the third tier to generate the resources? Now, after the substantial amendment of Part 12 of the Constitution, a number of taxes which existed have since got merged within the GSDP, and no doubt, of course, the states gave the advantage from the state GSDP. But there is no correlationship between the taxes which they lost and the taxes which become available to the third tier. So I have often wondered whether it would be sensible to assign a percentage from within the GSDP of the taxes which goes to state, which should be assigned for the third tier of government, either as a percentage or an absolute amount linked to the rate of growth of the GSDP. But that clearly I stayed away from, because it's not part of the functions of the Finance Commission, but it is a function of the GST Council. So you do wish to really ensure that the financial autonomy and the financial flexibility to the third tier exists, then I think more thought needs to be given beyond what property tax can do to substantially enhance the resources of the third tier of governance. And that, of course, brings me to the issue which I touched on per se, namely the full adherence to the constitutional requirement of constituting a State Finance Commission in a timely way, in the same fashion, with almost identical functions as the Central Finance Commission, and the alacrity with which they analyze those recommendations, the recommendations being given hopefully on time, take it to the state legislature, and present an action-taken report to the state legislature, which will make a substantial difference to the financial viability of the third-tier institutions. I see this because under the Constitution, if you read that particular proviso, it's really the obligation of the Central Finance Commission to merely ensure that the state finance commissions are constituted, and that is designed to make recommendations to augment the consolidated fund of the state for ensuring that the needs of the third tier of government are fully met. So these are aspects on which, in my view, much more needs to be done. So that was my second broad observation. My third very broad observation is the regulatory framework for sensible, orderly, coherent urbanization already in place, which should fill us with satisfaction. Perhaps the complexities of the regulatory framework, you have some kind of a regulatory framework with the central government. Most state governments have some kind of a regulatory framework. But if you look at really some of the stories where much more needs to be done in terms of India's pending economic reform agenda, one obvious one is factors of production, which come to anybody's mind. Factors of production which are fundamental: land, labor, and capital. Leaving aside the issues of labor, which we know tardy action is there, many states not having implemented the code on which the guidance had come. Issues of land, I think on digitization of land records, conformity with certain rules and framework in assessing the value of the land, and making land available in a manner which is orderly and sensible, remains a challenge for investors, remains a challenge in ensuring economic development. Either the costs are far too high. For instance, many of you would be very surprised that if you look at current highways which are being built, the Minister for Roads and Highways, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, has told me often that one of his biggest impediments is the issue of the availability of land in a non-controversial way, and in terms of prices which are competitive, not prices which significantly enhance the cost of building that infrastructure. So the reform of the land market and use of technology in really carrying forward this unfinished agenda on land market, land records, which is really transparent and really does away from the fact that one of the major areas of repetitive scandals in this country has been the issue of the land, the transparency with which the land becomes available. And it will become inevitably much more, because we do not have the advantage of surplus land. We have a very large percentage of global population, but the land area which is really available is significantly lower than what global averages would be. So I think that we do require much more work on this to really make that as a contributor to the engine of growth. And that has a serious impact on the ease of business and in terms of the way in which the typology of ranking in terms of India as with the ease of destination really becomes globally, genuinely competitive. My fourth point is that do we have regulators on the whole urban sector which act in coherence and in symmetry? I am not terribly in favor of a super regulator because I think it would impinge on the autonomy of states. As it is, I think that after the Part 12 of the Constitution, a number of things have been done which to some extent circumscribes the flexibility of the states. But I am certainly in favor of some degree of symmetry and some degree of coherence so that we have, within the framework of comparative federalism, policies on the urban sector which are investor friendly. My last point is this, and this draws from the fact of a remark which Vaidhi made when he so generously introduced me, that my most recent experience in the area of public policy and the area where I've been working has been the reforms of the multilateral development banks, where I have had the privilege of giving 2 reports, as with my co-chair, my colleague and friend, Professor Lawrence Summers, President Emeritus of Harvard. And what's the broad conclusion we reached? Take 2 minutes on that. The broad conclusion which I reached was this. Currently, all multilateral development banks taken together, and by the way, there are many more than come to your mind. What comes to your mind is obviously World Bank and Asian Development Bank, but there are 17 to 18 multilateral development banks. For a long time, I didn't know that Black Sea had a Black Sea Multilateral Development Bank, till I learned that there is also a multilateral development bank there. So you add up all this. The average lending of these multilateral development banks in an average year, leaving aside the abnormal years of the pandemic, where clearly lending went up for very anecdotal reasons, average year was, let us say, all taken together, $115 to $120 billion a year. And all this is being done on a very efficient financial intermediation. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, let us say the World Bank Group, let's say the World Bank, total amount of capitalization done today is just 22 billion. Against that, they have successfully lent 900 billion, which means 7 to 8 times very efficient leveraging and very efficient financial intermediation. Now here is the catch where I wanted to reach in sharp contrast to a very efficient financial intermediation from out of their own balance sheet, their record in being able to harness private capital has been an abysmal and a disappointing one. Against the 7 times on their own balance sheet on private capital, against each dollar, they have been able to only harness 0.6, which is less than $1. So, as we go forward, the issue which I wish to pose, how does one harness private capital much more imaginatively, much more innovatively on the same factor as we do with public capital? What kind of risk mitigation and what kind of incentives can be given to harness private capital while avoiding moral hazard questions? What do I mean by moral hazard question? Well, in my own group, when this issue arose, one of a very distinguished economists who is a member of this group asked me, oh, is it because private capital in urbanization and others expect an absurdly high rates of return, and they want a degree of guarantees on that. So gains are private, risks are public. And till then, without sharing secrets, Larry asked me the question, as he often does, is, NK, you have worked for far too long in the Indian Treasury and would have got all the handicaps that Treasury officials usually get, that such is your due diligence on making sure that these questions are really taken care of. The conditions are so arduous and onerous and so much of avoidance of risk whatsoever that the capital doesn't come in. So what is the way in which one can efficiently harness this, avoiding the issue of moral hazard, and yet being able to harness private capital? Unfortunately, the Indian bureaucracy is no different than the bureaucracy of the World Bank and the multilateral development banks. So, risk avoidance then informed risk decision making. Risk aversion then informed ability to take risks informs all these organizations. And therefore, I do believe that as we go forward, these institutions will have to change their processes, their procedures, but above all, their mindset in not acting really like a public sector bank and waiting for clients to turn up, but the ability to innovate private capital in terms of how to make creative use of guarantees, hybrid capital, blended finance, avoiding the cascade principle, which will allow these institutions and governments to be able to harness private capital much more innovatively and creatively than has been the track record in our past. So I thought that I had in mind these 4 or 5 issues that came to me, and I have taken this opportunity to share them with you. And I will stop here except to thank and to say that this one of the most a panel with such domain experts will, I'm sure, pick on many other factors, but these were the factors that came to my mind. And thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you.
Our gratitude, Mr. Singh, for such an insightful talk and knowledge-driven address. We are extremely privileged to have you with us this evening. Our gratitude once again to you, Mr. Singh, and thank you so much, Mr. P. Vaidyanathan Iyer, Executive Editor, The Indian Express, for such enthusiastically welcoming Mr. Singh. Can we all put our hands together for Mr. Singh? It was indeed a lot of knowledge-driven session. Thank you so much, sir. Well, moving ahead, today's session will focus on enhancing accountability in the governance of my city. To provide further insights on the topic, I would like to invite Mr. Udit Mishra, Associate Editor, The Indian Express, to kindly come and join us on the stage, please.
Hello and welcome to this session. I want to also thank the panelists for agreeing to be part of the first session. I would very briefly start with a couple of slides on urbanization, because a lot of lay readers might want to understand what is the basic standard at which we are starting the discussion. So, just the first bit about urbanization is that, it's not just a matter of people coming from rural areas to urban areas. Urbanization is, the world over, a massive engine of growth and disproportionately contributes to overall GDP. You earn better salaries, better incomes, and there is overall prosperity. So when we talk about GDP growth and economies growing, this is how many economies actually have grown, and stands to reason that you have these centers where people come together and grow and become richer, become more productive. And there's a reason for that, is because, most of the cities tend to focus on manufacturing and services. These are vocations which provide better output, higher incomes. And that then becomes an engine of growth. If we look at the data, it shows quite starkly that, by 2025, and data is sort of, different estimates are there, we find that, by 2025, just 600 cities will account for about 60% of the GDP worldwide. As of 2011, half the world's population lived in cities and generated more than 80% of the global GDP. And India specific, Indian cities account for 60% of the country's GDP while using just 3% of the nation's land. Now, this is a very striking number, and because it's about India, you can understand that 60% of India's GDP is coming from just 3% of our land. So, the density of economic activity and the revenue generation, you can understand from that. Now, at one level, urbanization in India is small. It's at a low level. We are at 31%. This is 2011 numbers. China 45, Indonesia 54, Brazil 87. But these numbers, as Mr. Singh also mentioned, they are dated, but they also can be misleading. We are small in, say, the proportion side, if you were to just take the 2011 numbers, but these are large in absolute numbers and growing. India already has the second largest urban community in the world. As of 2018, according to Niti Aayog, India's urban population was 460 million. By 2050, this would almost double. I think 416 more are what are projected. As Mr. Singh also mentioned, 50% would be our urbanization rate. But there's another level to this that, when, as a lay reader, again, I was also researching, I'm not an expert on this, but I found that an argument has been made that whether it is 31% or the 50 that we'll come to in 2050, these numbers are in some senses underreported. We are not gauging our urbanization level properly. And the three things here show how the three criteria over which we sort of judge whether an area is urban or not. 5,000 inhabitants or more, at least 400 inhabitants per square kilometer, and at least 75% of male working population engaged in non-agricultural pursuits. Now, these are the three things, and only when you satisfy this that an area is considered urban. But look at what happens if we sort of tweak it a bit. The number rises from 31 to 41 if we only take first and second. First and second were the density and the total population, and drop that 75% male population working in non-agricultural. It's sort of an arbitrary, and especially with the way economy is changing, it can be questioned. So if we just take first and second, the number rises to 41. This is in 2011 relation, when it was 31. If we take only the first one, 5,000 inhabitants, then the number rises to 47. And if we take just the second one, then the number rises to 71%, which is to say, if you look at only the density part of it. And this is 71% on 2011 numbers. So, now I was looking at separately, World Bank in 2015 found, and they used a global definition. So, same definition across the world. And according to them, 54% of Indians, that is 705 million, was staying in cities, quote unquote, and another 24% were residing in urban clusters. So, World Bank in 2015 found that around 78% could be, and this is now almost a decade old data. So, now coming to a very, very lay reader perspective about urbanization, we hear a lot, but I would want to situate it and then in a very common everyday experience. When we look at a new flyover being made or some new road being made, the common response is that, well, it seems like by the time this is made, this would be chock-a-block, why ain't anybody? And if it is clear to the person standing by the side of the road, the query is, why isn't better planning done? How can we improve the governance system? We look around, whether it is crime or any kind of governance issues, public transport, who do we go to? People, there's a huge gap between the people, the governed, and those who are governing them, and people do not actually know who to go to. And for everything, you cannot tweet to the to the highest law in the land. So before we blame anybody, the first episode, I thought, we should look at some of the more structural underpinnings of how we go about our urbanization. The structural issues, different cities across the world have tried different kinds of governance patterns. Different cities have also tried financial patterns, how to devolve money, how much to give, how to ensure that that money is used properly. So in this episode, we'll look at all of those issues, and in the future episodes, perhaps dig deeper into some of the more specific concerns that some of them perhaps we'll highlight today. So on that note, let's start with the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra, for setting up the context of this session for our guests and audiences. I request you to kindly stay back on the stage, please. And also, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our eminent and distinguished guests on the stage, Ms. D. Thara, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Ms. Debulina Kundu, Professor, National Institute of Urban Affairs, Dr. M. Govind Rao, Member, 14th Finance Commission and former Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Mr. Shirish Sankhe, Senior Partner Emeritus, McKinsey, Director and Founding Partner, ISEG Foundation, and Mr. Shrikant Vishwanathan, Chief Executive Officer, Janagrah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and gracing this occasion with your presence. I think, Mr. Mishra, I'll hand over the reins of the discussion to you.
Right, thanks a lot, everybody. Welcome. I just wanted to, as I mentioned, and I will tell the audience also so that everybody is in the loop, we'll have sort of two rounds of reflections. I thought first round, I would want all of you, because you come from very different streams and have domain expertise in that, to sort of share your reflections on, what is the state of play? Where are we now, how we came here, and sort of what are the issues sort of that are plaguing our urbanization story. And the second round, we'll focus more on the solutions bit, on what are the specific policy changes, structural changes, legislative changes that you think can bring about a improvement, or do we need wholesale changes? So let me first invite Professor Kundu. I think she has a presentation. Can we load it up, please?
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Indian Express and Omidyar Foundation for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very important subject, which is also very close to my heart. Can I have the slides, please? Yeah. So, as was already discussed, we are aware that we do not have the 2021 census with us, but there are projections by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, supported by the RGI, as well as we have the World Urbanization Prospects figures. So based on which we are aware that by 2047 the country will be 50% urban, and by the middle of this century we will be 877 million. 53% of the population are expected to be living in the urban areas. And as already discussed, urban areas are drivers of economic growth, we always quote a figure of 60%, 63%, 62.5% as GDP coming from the urban sector. The 11th five-year plan gave a figure of 62.5%, but we do not have any methodological base. So these are all guess estimates. So the only Government of India figure is from the National Account Statistics pertaining to the year 2011-12, which was published in 2017-18, and the figure is around 52%, 52.05%. So that's from the Government of India. But there are various organizations working on the GDP, and we have various guess estimates. So that is one point I thought I should make here. And also, when we look at urbanization and per capita GDP, I was just trying with my team members here, we were trying to work out the correlation between per capita GDP on the one hand and level of urbanization, how they play with each other, 2001, 2011, 2021. So between 2001 and 11, we find an increase in the R values. But when we look at 2021, with the projected figures, I found the R value has declined. So without the actual figures with us, I think we should not worry too much about this. But once we have the 2021, whenever the census happens, the figures come, I think we need to look at these figures. When we look at the pattern of urbanization as of 2022-23, we work very closely with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and we have data on at least the statutory towns. So as of now, we have 4,962 statutory towns, 62 cantonment boards, 4,900 statutory towns. And if we look at the size class structure, what we find is that we have a very top-heavy urban population. More than 70% of the population are living in class 1 cities. Whereas if you look at the numbers, we have a very bottom-heavy numbers of towns. So more than 87% of the towns below the population of 100,000 are there in less than 1 lakh category. And one very important reason is because of the high share of the new census towns which came up in the last decade. And we also have a low share of rural to urban migration. So going back to your last episode on migration, I would just reflect on that. You know, urbanization is no more happening because of a large section of the population coming from rural areas to urban areas. The last census came up with a figure of around 91 million people, incremental population, and around 37% of that was basically because of the addition of new census towns. The definition which you came up with, I think we need to also clarify our understanding here. We have the statutory towns and the census towns. Statutory towns because urban development is a state subject, and because of which new urban centers, statutory towns are designated by the respective state governments. But when we look at the census towns, it's the RGI which defines 5,000 population, 400 persons per square kilometer, and 75% of the male workers. It's not only male workers, but also male workers who have worked in that sector for more than 6 months in a year. So just going to the numbers, I would like to also remind you that we are around 10,000 urban centers just now. We have around 4,962 statutory towns, and because of this census towns coming up in a large way in the last decade, I think even by very conservative estimates, we will have at least 1,000 new census towns. In the last census, we had 2,530 new census towns which came up. So it's basically in situ urbanization which is happening. You are where you are, but because of sectoral diversification, there is urbanization, and which again one thing we need to keep in mind is that these census towns are not urban by governance. These are census towns are actually under the Ministry of Panchayati Raj. So we are urban by definition, but rural by governance. So here I tried to calculate the incremental population, and what we understand from the red bar is that in the past decade or in the current decade, what we will find is that the increment in the urban population will be more than the rural. And the reasons are very obvious, because there is no backward migration. What happened during COVID was something very specific, but it generally happens that from rural areas, people migrate to urban areas, because of which we will have more of population being added to the urban areas. And another very important thing which I would like to also mention is that since the 80s, there has been a systematically decline in the growth rates. And it was only in the last decade that there was a 0.03% increase in the urban growth rate, and that is because of the addition of the census towns. And by all projections, whether we use the Government of India projections or the World Urban Population projections, the both rural and urban growth rates are likely to decline. One very important aspect which we city authorities, when we plan for our cities, we forget is the age structure of the population. We need to keep in mind. Just now we have 30% population as children and adolescents, but over time, I think our demographic dividend is likely to increase. And again, the challenge of job creation is thrown up. And by the 50s, I think if you look at the third pyramid, you find there is a very high share of aged population above the age of 65. So when we are planning for our cities, we also need to take into consideration this aspect. And the population in the age group of 24 to 45, I believe we need to create jobs for them. Otherwise, the demographic dividend may turn into a demographic disaster. So this we have already discussed. The point you were raising, I think that's addressed here, like, are the definitions adopted by India very stringent? So if we look at definitions from across the globe, if we take into consideration the definitions adopted by the UK, Australia, Greece and Bahrain, we are 33% urban. If we take the 5,000 population criteria, which has been there in various countries, we are 47%. World Bank's agglomeration index, we were 55. And if we look at the nightlight data, we are already around 80% urban. These two maps would also throw some understanding on the urbanization pattern. First is the peripheralization, and also the high urban footprint, which spills to the urban peripheries or peri-urbanization, which is happening very fast. So if you look at the nature in which urbanization is happening, other than the cities of Hyderabad and Bangalore, I think most of the big cities haven't grown much within their municipal boundaries, or there has been a negative growth rate. So if you compare between 2001 and 11, most of the cities, at least in case of Kerala, I worked very closely with the state urban development of Kerala, where we found that for all the 7 class 1 cities, there has been a depopulation. Whereas Kerala is one state where the level of urbanization has doubled from 25% to 48%, 47.78%, which is equivalent to 48%. And the reason being the increase in the census towns. So the urban agglomerations were formed because of the sectoral diversification which happened in the existing towns. So what we find is that the core is shrinking, whereas the periphery is increasing, which again leads to the formation of new urban agglomerations. And we did a study with one of our German counterparts, BBSR in Germany, where we tried to look at the growth pattern of districts at the district level, because beyond that we did not have data, to see what is the relationship between growth of built up and growth of population, where we found that about 88% of our districts, there we found that the growth of built up is higher than the growth of population. So sprawling needs to be taken into account when we plan for our cities. So this is some exercise we had done using nightlight data. So what are the areas of concern? One would be the political and civic administrative structure, the urban planning, municipal finance and fiscal empowerment of our ULBs, and again, as was mentioned by during the keynote address, I think the service delivery, be it land, be it housing, it should be more of citizen-centric. I will not go into details, but I'm mindful of the time constraint. But when we look at the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, we are aware that there has been limited devolution of functions. Most of the functions are still today with the state governments. And even the power to change property tax in many states, they lie with the state governments. Very few states do have devolved the power to raise property taxes or to bring in new taxes to the ULBs. The municipal acts in most of the states are still archaic, and there are multiplicity of departments, parastatals working hand in hand with the ULBs. Capacities are, constraints are still there, and it is more so for the small and medium ULBs which lack staff with specific skill sets. And there is a need for training not only of the officials but also of the elected representatives. And when we talk about mayors, we find empowered mayors in countries like China or the US, but in India we have the mayors are more ceremonial heads, right, with very limited powers. The terms of the mayors are not coterminous with the ULBs. Elections do not happen at the same time. And they do not have, the mayors in our country do not have the power to write the ACRs of the municipal commissioners or whosoever is heading the city. A report brought out by NITI did indicate, and we are also aware, Thara madam here, she is working very closely with the ULBs on the Amrut mission, and she will explain more of this, that our ULBs do not have master plans to guide their process of growth. And planning in the cities is fragmented. There are various agencies which are responsible for planning. And one big elephant in the room is the census towns, as I mentioned, that though they are urban by definition, but still rural under governance. So, and when we look at the coverage of services, there the coverage is much lesser. And we do not have trained planners in many of the cities. When we look at municipal finance and fiscal empowerment, I will very briefly touch, because we have stalwarts here in the panel who will explain more of this. But intergovernmental transfers, if we compare India with other countries, it's minuscule. Municipal revenues as percentage of GDP is less than 1% in our country, when countries like Brazil have 7.4% and South Africa around 6%. After the introduction of the GST share of ULB's tax revenue, again that has come down. User charges are not linked to usage in most of the ULBs. Inefficiency in the collection of user charges, that's there everywhere. And charges are also not revised very regularly. And in addition to the user charge, the main source of funding in most of the ULBs is the property tax. And here again, if you look at the aggregate values, it's less than 0.15% of the GDP, when for developing countries it's 0.6, whereas for the developed countries it's at least 2%. And the problems are basically of narrow tax base. There are a lot of exemptions, incorrect valuations, collection efficiency is not good, and also there are very infrequent revisions and inefficient collections in most of the ULBs. And if you look at size classes of ULBs, you find metropolitan cities or large cities are much better managed than the small towns, where you have dearth of services and also the own revenues and the intergovernmental grants, both are much less. E-governance is still picking up in most of the cities, and when we look at ULB websites, most are static or non-functional. Very few would have the adequate data which most of us would need. So that is one area where I think ULBs need to work. And I stop here because there are other panelists. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, there are many things that you pointed out, both on the governance aspect of it, the fact that census towns, urban is by definition rural, by governance, the state of mayors and what role they play, and also the fiscal part, which is where the rubber hits the road, as it were. Who has the money and do they have the ability to spend it? So we'll take up some of these points, and other panelists can also contribute. But let me first invite Mr. Sankhe, who's perhaps the best known name if you Google urbanization, many of his reports might come up. So, and he has a good understanding of how things have been in other countries also. So if I could request you to reflect a bit on that, not just the Indian experience, but also how it has been elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. My own urbanization experience partly started with starting to work in Mumbai in 2005, then writing the 2010-11 urbanization report of India, which was built on the other countries, and later on working on a few Maharashtra cities, and now working with the central government on 4 or 5 cities, 1 tier 1, 2 tier 2s, and 1 tier 3 or 4, because the urbanization realities in India are very different. So that's the type of experience. We did a lot of research, and you have continuing that with a number of numbers. The numbers, of course, the percentage urbanization is a debate, I understand. But I'll just take the central thing, which is currently around 36% probably, with census town added maybe another 5%, 40%, moving on to 50 to 60% over a period of time, right? We also tried to estimate how much of the GDP and taxes come from. 80% of the taxes were coming from urban areas, and around 65% of the GDP coming from urban areas. So it's a growth driver for India, which I think all of us will agree on. And the percentage of urbanization, I think 50% of this, the 5 states which are more than 50% urbanized already. Okay, that's important because we are state by state, at least or very close to thing. Of course, only the census will prove, but it's Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Punjab potentially, right? 50% urbanized by 2030, right? So that 50% of India has already started happening at many cities. But if you come from state to cities, I think there are 68 cities which will be more than a 1 million population in the next few years. Okay, and that's more than I think 50 in Europe. Okay, so I think already the number of cities will be quite high. And 13 cities, what we call tier 1, about 4 million by 2030. So the basic point is the numbers are very large, and we try to compare actually not just the population. Of course, population will India and China take the cake, but also in GDP. And we found that many of the cities, especially the metropolitan areas, were bigger than many countries like Malaysia, right? NCT or MMR will be bigger than Malaysia, right? Or Chile or Portugal, right? And at that stage, right, and of course we only talk about municipal governance, but in this I would like to talk about metropolitan governance, which is a very, very, very important point, mostly missed because we directly use the word municipal for urban local bodies, which I would like to at least, one of the contribution would like to make is the idea of the metropolitan governance. I'll come to that. But they are bigger than countries. Now just imagine an area of the size of Malaysia or Portugal or Chile being governed the way it's currently governed, right? And that's the challenge we have. Urbanization is a 100-year force, right? It's going to keep on happening, whatever the numbers are, and it will reach somewhere between 80 to 95%, by almost all definition over the next 50, 60 years, right? The other conclusion we also made, and I don't know whether that's still the conclusion of the ministry, but business as usual is going to lead to chaos and gridlock. Okay, because it is just, and I'll talk about why that is the case, and the solutions I will probably talk about in the second phase. But as we looked at urbanization, as Professor Kundu also mentioned, and many of the panelists are going to mention, it's really a tripod that you have to think about, which is governance, of course, is there, but it's planning and funding. All three have to come together. All three have to come together to really get an urbanization working, and it's a 30, 50-year system, so you almost cannot make any change in 3 to 5 years. You can build a road, you can build a few flyovers, but you can't really change the basic urbanization force in 3 to 5 years. So it's a 10, 15, 20, 25-year thing. That's why for 2047, we need to start now. Okay, so 5, 10, 15, whatever happened historically, we can learn from, but we need to start now. So on funding front, I'll go to funding, planning, and governance, the complications. So our calculation said that we need to invest I use dollars just for $140 per capita per year on average in urban areas, okay? And our number last time we looked at, and these are difficult numbers to take up because you have to calculate, was around 20, right? So if you need 140 and if you spend 20, right, it's a 7-to-1 difference. Some of that has changed in recent years with central government coming in metro programs and so on. So capital has gone up, but it's a 7-to-1 ratio. Our sense is that you're fighting this battle with both arms tied around the back, and almost nothing you can do at the local level will change this unless, and I'll mention that for others also. So that's the funding part. How to change that, I think we'll discuss in the second part, and Dr. Singh also mentioned some of those solutions. Right? On the planning front, again, it's a 5, 10, 25-year cycle, and it has two elements, and one of the elements is very close to my heart, which is called the economic master plan. Right? We only think about master plan as a physical master plan. We believe, and this is now, as we are trying to do economic master planning of 4 cities, we are coming this is true. It is not just movement of people. It's movement of goods. If a city is a port city, then the town will develop around that, right? If it is a diamond district, then that's where urbanization will happen or can be directed to, right? If it's a financial city, it's different, right? And it has to be thought through an economic plus physical lens. An economic lens is based on the endowments of that city. We'll give you some examples, but one of my favorite sentences, and that's the solution part, but economic master planning in addition to physical master planning as a way of thinking of the city for the next 5, 10, or 20 years. So that's the planning part, right? And again, I think you mentioned it in your presentation that even the plans, I asked so many cities, please show me your transportation master plan, okay? Not physical master plan, not land use plan. Transportation master plan for 2030, 2035, 2040. Almost every city, developed city in the world has this. I think ours is probably less than 2-3%, right? Transportation master plan, right? to say how many metros, how will it this thing, how will people move, where will jobs get created, and so on, right? So that's the part of planning. And sometimes I wonder, and I'm sure ministry colleagues will talk about, is that why planning, which is actually a physical activity, right, that doesn't require as much money, is so poor in India. I'll talk about what needs to be done on that. And the last part is, of course, governance. And I always wondered about, there's a municipal governance and what I call metropolitan governance, right? Metropolitan or regional governance. And this becomes quite important because even like the Mumbai area where I work in has like 10 municipal corporations. One is a Gram Panchayat, which must be the census town, which is very large, but is a Gram Panchayat, right? 11. All of them are expanding, okay? And the connection, but the entire area needs to think through water, sewerage, transport, not just for the small municipal corporation, but for the entire region, because there's huge economies of scale at metropolitan region, right? So you need a metropolitan architecture, and that's, you asked about the whole international experience. We found, and when we did the 2010 report and till 2020, we looked at presidential forms of democracy. We looked at communistic countries like China, and we also looked at parliamentary democracies like UK and Japan. All of them, for their large cities, and I'll come to the smaller cities, large cities had the metropolitan architecture, and most of the time, inserted metropolitan mayor system. Okay, I don't know when it will come to us, but a metropolitan mayor, like London has these boroughs with local governance, like our small municipalities, and then there's a metropolitan mayor that sits on the top, and under that there are departments, right? So metropolitan planning now, whether a metropolitan mayor is too much of a jump for us, we'll talk about, okay, as a part of the solution. So that's the part of the governance. And at a municipal level, the term of the municipal commissioner, okay, who is the main authority, okay. Mayor, the ceremonial nature of the mayor, which is no political boss, and the funding that goes with it, okay. So overall, our sense is that India has made huge strides in many areas, and again, lots of things towards urbanization also, but I would still give it 2 or 3 out of 10 in terms of evolving the system of urbanization for the next 25 years. That will make sure that our urbanization is much better planned than the haphazard that is happening. Of course, the solutions are there. It's not a lost deal, and everybody is working on it, including many of the panelists, but I'd just like to point out there and stop and then come to the solution next.
Sure, thank you. I mean, the gap between what we require to invest and spend 140 per person per annum and spending it only $20 is quite a remarkable one. And the fact about economic master plan being a central concern that we should bother about. Let me now go to Professor Rao. Yeah, please, absolutely. As many of you know, he's one of the giants in public finance, and fiscal devolution is something that is very close to his heart. So if you could reflect a bit on that, where does the money go? How does it, India seems to be increasingly living in cities, but we don't have the money.
Thank you. Let me outset thank Indian Express and Mudit in particular for asking me to be a panelist. And I do not pretend to be an expert in urban issues. I approach the entire problem from the perspective of fiscal federalism. In fact, when Ms. Dr. Ahluwalia was writing the report, she contacted me and said that I want a fiscal federalism perspective and want you to write a paper with an internationally known author, known economist. So there is a paper which we wrote, which is also in her book, as well as which is available with Richard Berg. And this is a working paper of University of Toronto, working paper of University of Atlanta, and of course NIPFP. I mean, I was at NIP at the time. So let me thank you, and then let me also say that I will be I mean, in fact, both the presentations so far, including Mr. Singh's, have been very educating, and I have no differences with those. But I will be broadly talking about the policy from the fiscal federalism perspective. Let me start by saying that cities are leading edge of economic dynamism, and that's something which everybody says. They create agglomeration economies. They enable productive interactions with people. In fact, that's much more important because it's the interactions that lead to competitiveness. It leads to innovation. It leads to improvement in productivity. They are the centers of entrepreneur trade. So they create a spirit of competition, and we have heard of in China the competition between the cities, how that has created a huge amount of dynamism. But whether we can reach the potential of these cities as triggers of economic dynamism depends upon the enabling environment. That is, basic standards of public services provided, good policies and quality institutions, and a tolerant environment. In fact, you see, that's something which we don't all the time see. And you come up and say that, in a particular state, only the local people should be the employees. That's not a tolerant, this thing. It's a protectionism. You start doing that. You need a tolerant environment for interaction and sustained provision of a range of public services, which includes water, sewerage, garbage, fire protection and, transportation. And if you really want to have, you do need to have high quality people, which means that you need to have, avenues for social interaction and also avenues for education, healthcare. All these are important. One has to look at the thing from a sort of holistic perspective. But more important is the political and governance system and responsive. Now, one of the basic implementable rules of fiscal decentralization is that you should have clarity in assignments. There should be sufficient funds that are allocated to meet the assignment system. And there should be, in fact, the urban local bodies should have their own functions, funds, and functionaries. You start asking these three questions. Do we really have functionaries at the municipal level? Determined by chosen by the municipalities? Most of the functionaries that you have are the state functionaries. Now, they would have interest in municipality. It is not that they don't have. But the question is, municipal bodies, even in Bangalore or Mumbai, the municipal corporation cannot decide who should be the person who will look after the thing. As far as the functions are concerned, let me also tell you that there is a birth defect in the entire 74th Amendment of the Constitution. I'm sorry for using this particular terminology. But you see, you have 7th schedule to the Constitution, which basically says, says entry number 5, local governments is a state responsibility. And you have Article 243W, which says that I am going to, the state government may, at its discretion, devolve 18 functions. It may also devolve other functions. Now, if it cannot devolve other functions, it may devolve 18 functions. It is left to the state government to decide what it wants to devolve and what it not. So there is no clarity in assignment. And you see, assignment system, clarity in assignment is in Post theorem we say there is like a given property rights. Your investments take place only when you have property rights. And it's nobody's, baby at the end of the day. So, I mean, you have a basic problem in the lack of assignment, a proper assignment system. And even so, I mean, if anything has to be done, the state government has to approve. They don't have any sources of revenue. Even the property tax, even if they are assigned them, that has to be approved by the state government. That has been, Dr. Kundu mentioned it. It has to be approved by the state government. There is one state government which goes about and makes an announcement saying that up to 300 square yards, you don't have to pay the property tax. Nobody has asked the local body whether, that is the case. This was Punjab. It happened with Prakash Singh Badal. And a similar thing, they did it in Rajasthan earlier. So, I mean, there are examples of that nature. So, when you have this birth defect, the basic birth defect, there is always a problem, confusion on what exactly they are supposed to be doing. They try to do some activity mapping. But then, obviously, the comparison between different states become very difficult. Because the functions designed, assigned are very, very different. And obviously, that's one of the basic problems that we have. I already mentioned about the functionaries, so I don't want to say anything. Local bodies possibly can appoint low-level functionaries. But then they don't have the capacity. There is no possibility of developing the capacity in them. And there hasn't been any attempt to do that. So you do need to really have, well-managed, bureaucracy if you really want a proper governance system. Let me come to finance. That's where the problems are even more serious. You have the functions assigned. There is no link, and it's one of the important things that we talk about. We call, in fiscal federalism literature, we call it a link between revenue expenditure decisions. It's called the Wixelian link. Not Wixel basically talked about it. It's one of the most important things everywhere in terms of having both accountability as well as incentives. There is no Wixelian link in the system. Revenue things come differently from that. That means that even when the state government says that these are the functions that you may do, they don't have sufficient funds to do that. So they have an unfunded mandate. Not surprisingly, even years ago, Deepak Mohanty did a study. See, there is an old Zakaria committee norms. And according to Zakaria committee, this, what are the, for the basic local public services, what are the things to be provided? He said actually, his estimate, 24% of the Zakaria Commission norms are actually met. That means that 76% is not met. Most of the municipal corporations have a shortfall of more than 75% in terms of proper funding the case. Now, when we come to own resources, as I said, in most of the cases, the major source is the property tax. And, it was already pointed out that property tax constitute less than constitute about 0.14% of the GDP. And now, obviously, there are models of property tax. The entire Tamil Nadu collects about 3,500, 4,000 crores. Bangalore municipal collects about 4,000 crores. There was some reform that was done, but have not been kept up. You have the capital value-based taxation, but the people who own the capital don't like it. You have the rental-based values, capital taxation. There are places like Mumbai which has a Rent Control Act, so you cannot levy the thing. And then you have basically area-based taxation. That's the one which the thing. Originally, it was called the Patna model because in Patna they tried. But then Patna has given up. But many of the other places have taken up. I think Bangalore's this thing is basically that. They are still doing some more work, some more reform that is being done. And, but the point is, even there, you can't index it for inflation, because anytime you want to change it, again you have to go back. And, it's a problem. Problem is that you have low levels of public service. Actually, property tax partakes partly the value of user charge. It's partly a user charge and partly a tax. In fact, there are models in fiscal federalism, basically mobility model of Thibault, which basically said the people choose the level of public services and taxes which are most closely aligned to their preferences. So when Samuelson came out with public goods theory, he said that, it is possible to reveal the preferences for local public goods through a mobility, if you have footloose mobility. And then Valley Oates came out and said that even if you don't have footloose mobility, the capitalization of properties basically take care of things. But so property tax is partly a user charge and partly a tax. But then when you have low levels of services, there is a vicious circle. Poor services, low levels of property tax collection, further, poor services. So we do need to have a very serious issue. The 15th Finance Commission did an attempt, and then they said that you should notify the floor rates, and then it should increase, that should be done by 2023-24. By then, from the next 2 years, they should grow at the rate of the GDP growth, GSDP growth. But the point is, who determines what the floor rate is? I mean, for fulfilling the condition, a state will say this is the floor rate. Is it realistic? Does anybody? And the other important thing is, this is one of the major things about the conditions to the local bodies. In the 14th Finance Commission, we had a very, very detailed discussion on this. The point is, 13th Finance Commission gave 9 conditions. And one of the members who used to be who was at that time secretary, before he became the secretary expenditure, she said she was very happy. Why? Because the conditions for the states, the losers are the local bodies. What is the incentive for the state to undertake the particular thing? So they wouldn't fulfill the conditions, so that much money is saved for the center. The basic issue is that the same problem here, suppose, even if, we need to see, because this is a substantial amount of money. But the point is, what is the incentive for the state to undertake these particular reforms? All the reforms. So conditionalities will have to be direct to the loser or this thing you need to identify and put the conditions on him. But anyway, this is important. I am not saying that this is not important. So now, they have to put the floor rates, and there are problems of that nature which will come, and possibly that has to be seen, after 2000. Now let me come finally to transfers. The basic transfers have to come from the recommendation of the state finance commissions. And just before that, there was this issue of GST, which Mr. Singh mentioned. This is actually a recommendation by Vijay Kelkar. He has been basically saying that. And in fact, the GST, the original proposal in 2004, was based on a proposal I had made in the expert group of taxation of services. The same recommendation he had put in there. Again, I don't want to go into that. That's a different issue. But basically, he said that some 2% extra rate can be put for the local bodies. Now, the question is then, in any case, urban local issues will come in, but whatever be the case, you can say that, I mean, these days you have the technology, find out what is the urban consumption, and then possibly 2% of that can be allocated. But the question is, who is interested? At the end of the day, who is interested? One. And as far as this thing is a State Finance Commission, less said the better. I would not go into that. I mean, most of the states have not done it. You should be having really the 6th State Finance Commission by now. And many of them didn't do it. And there is no commensurate act, unlike the union government where it says there is a Finance Commission Act which lays down the qualification and members of the commission, of the chairman and members of the commission. There is no such thing there. Any politician and who cannot be employed somewhere else is put in there. Now, I mean, even if it is there, it's so broad that you can, and then many of them don't understand what they are really supposed to do. Oftentimes that report cannot be used, and even if it is used, the state government doesn't use it, and there are all sorts of problems associated with that. And it is again an important recommendation of the 15th Finance Commission that they should, have the state finance commissions. And as far as the Union Finance Commission is concerned, the constitutional requirement is the follows: augmenting the consolidated fund of the state to supplement the resources of the panchayats or the urban local bodies based on the recommendations of the State Finance Commission. They forgot about the based on the recommendations of the State Finance Commission, but they have been giving some ad hoc grants. Now, ad hoc grants, they're really ad hoc. And of course, they have, the 15th Finance Commission has substantially increased that, but there is a possibility of state government substituting it. You see, there is no, I mean, when the Union Government Finance Commission gives, the state government gives less. At the end of the day, nobody really determines that. Now, so you do have, and again, when I said about the birth defect assignment, that's precisely the reason why you don't have the planning. Urban planning is not an important thing. Nobody's baby. And it's very well recognized and it has been very well identified. At the end, let me also say an interesting statement which my guru and mentor used to make. There was a panel discussion like this with Ashok Mitra from West Bengal, was basically trying to say that our center is, doing a lot of things. And so the next speaker was Raja Chelaya, my mentor. He said, everyone wants decentralization, but only up to his level. Thank you.
Absolutely right. Everyone wants decentralization up to their level. There's so much of, as journalists, we keep writing and reading about center-state relations. A lot of energy is spent on that. To my horror, once I went to, I think NIPFP had come out with a study on the devolution of money to the third tier. And the story was, as you say, there's hardly any money flowing down. There were no timelines met, state finance commissions not being formed or action taken reports not being filed. And it was not even, I realized that it was not even talked about that such a thing happens. And as you mentioned, there's a sort of a birth defect even in the constitutional change, that there is no incentive for states to actually make a substantial improvement on that. Let us approach the whole issue of urbanization from a very different perspective now. Let me invite Mr. Srikanth Vishwanathan, who's CEO of Janagrah, and sort of leads the civic society voice on this. Can you share your own understanding on how you see it from a very different lens? How do you sort of see India's urbanization panning out? What's sort of ailing it? Yeah.
Thanks, Udit. We recently did a study of the municipal acts, 80-odd municipal acts of all 35 states, and 44 town and country planning acts, covering all states of India across a what we call as a city systems framework across 50 odd parameters, and we released it just last month. So I'm not going into the more the diagnostic side of things. The report is available in the public domain. I'll touch on some of those areas. But I thought what will be useful today is, as you said, as a civil society representative, for me to locate this in what we see as a political economy perspective. We are a practitioner organization, so these are based on, of course, the data from municipal laws is based on research, but the political economy perspective is based on anecdotes. One is we have to remember that the diagnosis so far that we've made of urbanization, urban governance reforms in India has often tended to be at a national perspective. But what I think everybody is discovering is there are a minimum of 35 different diagnoses that has to be required, that is needed. Frankly, this is not a union level issue. This is a state level issue, not just because the constitution says it, but because the context is very different. And in a case such as this, it's context that matters. I think one place where we may be missing the forest for the trees is the city agenda is the city human development agenda is similar to the country human development agenda and the state human development agenda. It is place based. You need a single point of political accountability like you have at the union level or at the provincial level. The ministers for water and for each of the other infrastructure areas or social infrastructure areas report to the person who governs the geographical entity. So the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister, their remit is defined by geography, besides by functions allocated to those levels of government. But in the case of a city, in India, India has not recognized the city as a distinct unit of governance or of economy, constitutionally or statutorily. So we often look at the city agenda through the lens of service delivery and infrastructure, and as an aggregation of different services and infrastructure and grievances that citizens have, without thinking of it as a human development agenda that is place and people based, which we often do at the union and state level. Second is assuming we agree that it's the state that has to take a leadership role in this, we have to remember that our state Vidhan Sabhas are quite inactive. And we've also studied the number of amendments to municipal laws, and they are few and far between. And they have not kept pace. Amendments to municipal laws and town and country planning laws have not kept pace with contemporary needs of urban India. This is also partially on account of slightly meta issues like the anti-defection law, where there is no chance for the urban representative to put forward his or her agenda forcefully. That said, it is not that there has not been any movement. Obviously, in the last 10 years, much as civil society never would want to credit the government, when you look at data, if I look at the allocation at the union level for 2009-10 and 2021-22, there is a 488% increase. And at the union level, I'd say our own understanding is the union has two levers when it comes to influencing urbanization and urban development in India. One is funding. I'm setting aside for a moment the controversy around centrally sponsored schemes and use of Census, etc. Right? I'm setting that aside for a moment, that ideological issue. But the union government has funding, and it generally provides thought leadership. States generally look up to the union for models, standards, guidelines, and whatever emerges from the union, either from the Niti Aayog or from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, is seen with a certain modicum of respectability, credibility, and expertise. So these are the two levers that the union government has. And I must say that over-dependence on those two levers is not going to give us incremental results. And if there has been a 488% increase in funding allocation, perhaps a little more can be done on thought leadership. But every additional rupee that you are going to lay out at the union level is not necessarily going to give you returns. And I'll talk about it in a bit. The green shoots for me are that while earlier it was the union that used to shout from the rooftops about the need for urban change, now we are seeing several state chief ministers, including in less urbanized states in India, like an Odisha or even a Chhattisgarh to a certain extent, take active interest in urban agendas and making them political agendas at the state level. That I think is a hugely welcome change. I remember when I joined the sector over a dozen years ago, the general narrative was that a couple of chief ministers in the southern states, which were already well urbanized, lost their elections because they over-focused on urban. That narrative has changed. I think urban has become a politically salient agenda at the state level. Even as there may be a discourse on freebies, etc., it is a fact that the urban agenda is firmly on the radar, which I think is a positive sign of change. However, we see that a lot of the state's allocations go towards two kinds of urban agendas. One is hard infrastructure, which is visible, like metro rail, like water supply systems, etc., where you're able to, in fact, where the benefits can be visibly felt or seen by individual citizens, right? Or they go towards direct benefit transfers for the urban poor or for the marginalized, where also they are able to see the benefits. So I feel an ideological discussion or an ideological diagnosis beyond the last 2-3 decades is not going to give us much benefit. We will, as civil society working from outside in, we'll also have to be savvy, which means the public health agenda is now center stage in cities post-COVID. And it has a lot of linkage to water, sanitation, and the non-communicable disease correlation with walkability, mobility, non-motorized transport, open spaces, greening, etc. is quite relevant, right? So public health is an important linkage. Second is climate, environment sustainability. The linkage between environment sustainability and cities. And the third, I would say, is gender, which is women's participation in the workforce, safety and inclusion of women, including the other excluded groups, but I'm counting women because they are emerging as a very important urban voting constituency as well. So I feel if we are able to link these three important agendas, and you're able to craft propositions where you're not just looking at upstream reforms which require you to amend the constitution or massive changes in the law, but you're able to combine them as projects plus reforms, which is you are able to create visible infrastructure, but combine them with upstream reforms. So in this intervention itself, I'm seeding some of the solutions, but I'll try and stick to time. I feel that there has to be a little bit of a reimagination, and we may have to move away from the traditional discourse of saying, unless you amend the 74th Amendment, there can't be a change. So that narrative, I think, is now time barred. The next thing I'd say is the two broad dimensions, I feel, at a broad level. I'm just doing a little bit of framing on the diagnosis. There's one challenge on state capacities in which I'd call out three issues, and I'm not going to get into the details of these. One is spatial development plans and design standards for public utilities, roads, footpaths, etc. Second is finances, public finance management, and also call out procurement. Procurement is proving to be one of those intractable challenges which is impacting urban development as it impacts several other areas as well. And the third is on cadre and recruitment rules and the level of staffing. There are smaller cities which have up to 90% vacancy in staff, besides, of course, incompatible skills and competencies. So one dimension is on state capacity. So if I were to respond to your question of how do you bring greater accountability into cities' governance, I would say the most important thing to do is to build the capacity of the state, irrespective of whether it's at the state level or at the city level. Today, the state does not have the capacity to hold itself accountable. It's not deliberate, it's not wanton, it's not only because of rent-seeking, corruption, etc. The second really important dimension, I feel, is participatory governance. The city is about first-mile governance, unlike the state or the union. And today, India does not have participatory governance structures in cities. In villages, maybe there are relatively stronger. I don't understand rural well enough, but I'm told that in the rural areas, there is a legacy. There is a legacy of participatory structures which are somewhat coalescing with government schemes and missions. For example, when there is a national health mission, the village health and sanitation committee is chaired by the village pradhan. There's no equivalent of that in the city. So even union level schemes and missions or state level schemes and missions, when they land or are grounded in the panchayat level, there is place-based governance. Whereas in the city, that doesn't exist, right? So participatory governance structures are broken, and you'll be surprised the number of municipalities to which elections have not been held have actually been rising in the last 10 years. And citizens have not had a problem with it, because citizens are actually not focusing on governance, but on service delivery. And you can't fault them for it. So our study showed that at a particular point in time, I think in 2019 or 20, 1,400 out of the 4,800 cities in India did not have elected councils. Some of them for as long as 9 years. And citizens really didn't take to the streets demanding elections. Some of them did go to court though. The second thing is, for first mile government, the village has a Gram Sabha. In the city, even a ward committee is not functional. So, and think of the nuance here, right? There are many political parties, the successful political parties are using the polling booth as a unit of mobilizing citizens. And that is what we had recommended as part of the community participation law, which was a mandatory reform under JNNUR, right? So some of those will evolve. They will take some time, but they can evolve, and the green shoots there are the success of women's self-help groups. So some of these ideas will take time to fructify. And the challenge really in participatory governance is today, if mayors and councils themselves are disempowered, there is huge reluctance among them to allow the institution and proper functioning of ward committees and further devolution. So the first step is for us collectively to develop a linkage between participatory governance and improved delivery and winnability of elections. Otherwise, it is seen as taking away power in that sense. So, a couple of other points. One is, Shirish and Debolina did speak about typologies of cities, right? So, I think today, at the union and state level, generally there is a one-size-fits-all approach. But we need a differentiated approach to cities, and it's not just metropolitan cities and other cities. There are about 5 cities which have 8 cities, I think, which have a population of more than 4 million. And there are another 38 cities with million plus population. Another 50 cities with a population of 500,000 plus, excluding the previous categories. I mean, so overall 88 cities with a population of more than 500,000. Totally about 500 cities with a population of more than lakh plus. And these cities constitute about 70% of India's population. So we have a large head and a long tail. Because you have 470 odd cities which have a population of about 70%, but you have another 4,400 cities with a population of 30%. Now, you cannot try and solve this problem city by city by city. You have to solve them as clusters. But that paradigm does not exist in India. But what is the opportunity there? The opportunity is to look at the district as a unit of urban governance. Some of us who were urban ideologues would get somewhat disheartened by the idea of the relevance of the district in urban governance. But the fact of the matter is today, if you go to a large state, and this happened to us a month ago, and we spoke about a street design project in their capital city, right, among India's largest states in India. Who do they refer us to? They do not refer us to the municipal commissioner of the city, not even to the district collector of the district. They refer us to the divisional commissioner. So de facto, there is already a role for divisional commissioners and district collectors in India. Now, this system is well established in rural, because in rural you have an elected government at the district level itself. In urban, you don't. But in many of the smaller cities, it's the district collector who has an important role in urban governance. I think it's important for us to make it de jure. That will also achieve rural-urban convergence, which is quite important when we speak about economy and livelihoods, climate change, etc. That's about the last point. I'd only say, I'll just call out the 10 instruments of change that we had called out in the recent report. And then I won't go to them one by one in the solution side, but I'll speak about them in a slightly more mixed up order. I think there are green shoots for us. I don't think it is a period of despondency. We are able to see the tide change. I would say in the last 10 years, we've made a lot of progress, but we do need to be innovative. And there has to be a lot more collaborations between the state, market, and civil society. Right? Even developed economies are realizing that governments alone will not be able to confront 21st century challenges. And no other country will face urbanization the way India will face in the 21st century. And India's state does not have capacities. But markets and civil society do have complementary capacities. So a partnership model where the state engages as equals, not as the dominant dispenser of patronage, but as an equal with markets and civil society, particularly in some intractable challenges, I think we'll be able to solve this problem. The 10 instruments of change that we had called out were spatial development plans, street and public space design standards, constitutional amendment to the 74th CAA, metropolitan governance, empowered mayors and councils, open cities and participatory budgeting as a catalytic reform, municipal taxation and transfers, municipal borrowings and audited financial statements for transparency and accountability at an institutional level, and to unlock pension and insurance funds, about which I'll speak in the next cycle, digital public finance management systems to track the flow of the rupee to bring in radical transparency, And lastly, municipal shared services and cadre and recruitment rule reforms. So these were the 10 that we had laid out. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You make some very interesting points about, the way the single point for accountability, that is not fixed. And I think perhaps when we are talking about solutions, that will figure as one of the issues. Which typically in India it is said it is PM, CM, and DM who are the three offices which have any power to actually affect change. But so whether we bring about the kind of uniformity that you're sort of saying for urban areas, or find some other solutions, and also the fact that at the union level a lot of allocations have been made, and a lot of thought leadership is there, but it's about state capacities also, and to look at clusters. You cannot solve it city by city. And a remarkable thing about unelected councils, that number rising and being this high, and not people not really bothering, which perhaps shows perhaps people do not actually see them as solution providers, which is in itself perhaps the problem. If they saw that as a place where the solutions come, more accountability might happen. And quite a pertinent point on the governance versus service delivery, that nobody sees that as provision of the governance. Let me come to you. Yeah.
I also think the problem definition and diagnosis has to be at a detail level and not at a headline level. So the issue of financing, for example, many cities have a huge absorptive capacity problem in even spending the money that they have. So we have a situation where India has a net deficit in the amount of capital that you need for cities. But many cities have unspent cash at the end of the year.
Yeah, valid point. Yeah. Let me come to you, ma'am. Thank you for patiently waiting and respecting the decision that you speak last. I wanted to ensure that many of the points that would be raised, you might be able to sort of give some perspective, since you are part of the ministry. And even though here the villain of the piece is a state actor, or in some sense the birth defect that Professor Rao talked about, how do you see some of these issues? I mean, this must be a massive issue in the ministry, how India is urbanizing, and the jobs challenge, housing challenge. So, the economic master plan that Mr. Sankhe talked about, how do you sort of see many of these issues?
First of all, I thank you for inviting me, and it has been a great learning curve, though some points were very repetitive, which we have heard through and through. I come from state of Gujarat after working for 23 years, and out of the 23 years, I think effectively 15 years I've been in urban sector in every possible capacity. Let me start. Shrikant spoke about a state. I probably can guess that state, and I know which state it is. But that state may have the divisional commissioner as the head. I mean, he may think that is a solution. I'm taking from Shrikant's this thing because it's very proximate to what he spoke before me. And, but it's as different as two children of the house, even the cities and even the areas of the cities in the country. Somewhere, this whole idea of decentralization, mayors becoming empowered, I think this is too long, too far. It may really change a lot of things, transform. But I don't know, from little experience I have and have been working in this sector, nuts and bolts of it. And I feel that we are missing two things. When from Delhi we speak, Delhi means I mean the experts, the think tanks and the people. They are doing macro analysis. And they say that, first of all, let's understand. The narration has been that ULBs are having no power, therefore they are not able to perform. They have no political relevance, so they are not getting funds. I think they are missing the point. If 78% people live in the urban local bodies, do you think any of the political dispensations can do away with their votes? I don't think so. I think there is a lot of focus now on, lot of focus on the, political level, even in the state, even in the ULB level, political level, to try and do something and show their achievement. Those days are gone when people accept it. Today, everything gets analyzed in 10 memes or 15 social media posts. What are we talking about? Absolutely the compulsion is high. Now, my engagement with this is in the operations, not so much a little away from it. So I may be a little biased towards what I saw, but I can tell you my experience and from national level and state level. First of all, I think it's definitely positive. It's not that negative. I can tell you a few things which is happening in the state. Cities are labor markets. They are not anything else. I agree totally that 500 Amrut cities, that is 100,000 plus cities, we have launched a program for GIS-based master planning. See, as a union government or even in the state government, unless GIS-based master planning will not change everything. But somewhere the conversation has to start. Urban planning in some states did very well. Like Gujarat has been the pioneer of it, whether we like it or not. So the Ahmedabad and Surat, these are the cities where the slums have gone down from 30%, 25% to today 11% and 5%. Go and see, it is true. Using urban planning as the policy. The political leadership, which was there at the state level, now at the country level, it was the Honorable Prime Minister who drove the urban planning. Urban planning is a political exercise more than any other exercise. It's not an expertise exercise. It is a political exercise where the political leadership has to take the call. And urban planning is not urban planning of regulation. It is pure economics where a citizen has to win along with the city. Now, this has been proved very well in the cities of Gujarat. We have proved it. We have beautiful infrastructure, not because we collect more taxes, but because we have lands apportioned from the private citizens into the public realm voluntarily, because we give infrastructure and therefore their real estate prices appreciate and they share a part of their appreciation with the city. Now, 60-70% of our GDP comes from cities. How much of it is apportioned into the city governance? Why not? Tax is going to be a dead weight loss, whether we like it or not. Even all of us speaking, we will always calculate how to go around the tax. So we will save in PF, PPF. Why do we do that? We should give it to the government. We don't. So there is a sense of actually not having a great gain from the property tax. Having said that, I agree that many of the cities are not levying enough to collect the tax. That part I'll tell you how we are handling it and how I see a lot of hope because a lot of things are changing. So therefore, I think, how do we think of innovative ways of apportioning this money which is coming because of the real estate price appreciation to a person or in the form of a house into the government partly so that we can spend on the infrastructure? It's a vicious cycle of getting the money, spending it on infrastructure, and so you get the money. So this has been proved in several cities. There are several cities which have shown this model. I come from Gujarat, I've seen it with. See, for example, the city of Ahmedabad, which we come from. It may collect X amount as tax, property tax, and it has a very good collection efficiency, 90% plus. It also collects 90% of tax money from the premium FSI fee, leading to densification of transit corridors. Now, these are all feeding into each other. So, if we look at the old realm of understanding urbanization, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. We need to look at, there's a lot of innovations which have to go into urbanization. And for that, you need to have open governments. Now, what is open government? I want to make it very simple. Today, if you go by the way the engineers and the PhD departments have been laying pipelines or doing things, and then, if you expect them, there is a legacy infrastructure. See, Indian cities are historical cities. They are not cities which have been formed by the government. Very few cities are formed by the government or created anew after independence. Most of the cities are historical cities. You go to the Delhi, the old Delhi will have very low built-up area, very low use of land in terms of FSI, but very high congestion and infrastructure serviced, though it may need replacement. You have a space for the infrastructure, you have to replace. Now, how do you rekindle that area? You think it's only that your regulations have to go up. Urban planning is a cornerstone of urban development. Now, urban planning is not saying yahan road aayega, yahan ye aayega, yahan. Urban planning has to hinge on economics. If you do good urban planning, it's good economics because it makes the citizen win and it makes you win. Number one. Number two, if you look at the cities, you have very good technologies. I'm only giving solutions because so many problems have been told. See, if you look at a city, you don't need now today to go and study and have an impressionistic views about a city. You have satellite images. Look at that. Temporal images from 2005 to 2023 or today even. You will get to know which side city is growing. But we don't put land into it. So I think urban planning has been a very weak link in the urbanization story of India. And this has to be attempted and attended to in an urgent manner, in a systemic manner, but it has to be understood by one and everybody. It is a win-win situation where money is created. Urban, whether we like it or not, people will come and settle in the urban. We may keep saying this service is not good, that service is not good, but people are going to flock. As we are talking, I'm sure 5 lakh people migrate to Delhi every year, I heard. Now, where will they live? What will they do? So, how do we, I can only say, I can never say 100% I've covered a city for water supply. Why? Because the moment I am covering 100th house, there are another 5 houses or house less people coming into the city. Now we need to look at how do we tackle that? And why are they coming? They are coming for employment, right? There's a push factor. Every developed country has gone through this phase. They have to come from rural to urban and the cities have to stabilize. They have to become the productive, this thing. And therefore, I think I totally agree with the agreement that urban planning is a very important part. Now, unfortunately, our urban planning has been building bylaws. Now, when you look at the building bylaws, I'm getting the nuts and bolts. We used to have this whole thing in a building bylaw, there will be margin and there will be ground coverage. I never understood why you need to have margin and ground coverage. You have defined the margins, leave it to the rest. The land should be utilized. Now, what did the union government do? We created a demand for urban planning reforms. Now, how did we do that? In the budget, this year, they have announced 15,000 crores. You know for what? This year, we have to dispense with 15,000 crores. We have only asked them to look at 6 proper things. One is, you have to fill in your urban planners posts. 50% at least, vacant posts. Second is, you have to onboard a private expertise and collaborate to deliver a urban planning project. Third is, we have said you have to at least implement a town planning scheme where the land is reorganized. Urban land is not as good as built up space it can yield. Today, if I tell you this piece of land cannot yield any built up space, the value becomes 0. So, in rural, land is land. In urban, land is equal to how much built up area it will give. So, we can play around with the air above the land. Now, how do you play with it? How much you give, how much you take is a matter of detailing and engagement. Now, that is another thing which we are doing. So, we have created this kitty. Last year, we released 4,000 crores, which we earmarked 6,000 crores. 4,400 crores we recommended, and finally, government released 4,000 crores to the cities for carrying out urban planning reforms. So, one of the reforms was, by aap margin rakho ya to ground coverage rakho. But you have to utilize at least 45 to 50 or 60% of the land, of your land, to build. And once you do that, you automatically bring down the heights. Once you do that, you automatically bring down the carbon footprint. So, this one was adopted by 8-9 states, which was not there. And states have single unified bylaws, building bylaws. So, this has created now surplus creation of at least another 20% of built up area within the same land available. Keeping a comprehensive development paradigm is very important. Now, we can create demand by funding for reforms, and this is working. Last time it was 4,000 crores, this time it was 15,000 crores. And already states have showcased. We don't go by if they say, we have done it, tick. No, we go by area, what have you done? We have told them to create transit-oriented development corridors. We have told them to create urban forests. We have told them to create, at least take up 5 water bodies and show us that it is developed. So, and all this is, and money is put on each of this. And I must say, there has been a tremendous response and real work. I again would say that if you look at urban paradigm, even if you achieve 60 to 70% of what you want to achieve, you're still there, still there. Now coming to water supply. See, government has invested so much money, 488% increase. We were having 41% water supply coverage in urban areas in 2012-13 or 2011. This is your census. Census says 48% because that was 4,041 cities. Now it is 4,900 cities. If you include everything, apple to apple comparison, it was 41%. Today, your water supply coverage is 70% to the household. We looking at sewage coverage. Now, sewage, we are still weak. We have 60% of the houses. But none of the countries in the world or cities in the world have 100% piped sewage and treatment model. It is decentralized sanitation. So we have to look at how we will handle our septic tanks and where do they go. That is, again, a point of concern which we need to. The fourth thing I would like to say is mobility. Mobility, I think we need to have a mix of bus and metro and paratransit. That is where, again, a lot of work should happen. Already, though metros are happening very well, the recent BM e-bus scheme of 18,000 buses and so on is a step in that direction. I think we need to look at it. And finally, I want to say that, human-oriented development programs like PM Swanidhi, giving small loans to the street vendors is again a part of it. Public health, this time 25,000 crores was given by 15 Finance Commission for slum clinics and wellness centers to the urban area. This was done, we had submitted this, requested for this during the COVID period, and it was accepted too and given. Now, how do we handle, see, we are sending money. We have to understand, giving money is one part of it, but absorptive capacity should be created. I can only say, when we started all these missions, the whole idea was to make them do work. Whether it is the parastatals or whether it is the ULBs, make them do work so that they can learn. I am happy to state that when we started, even 3,000 crores could not be spent by the cities for water. Today, they are able to spend 15,000 crores in a year and earmark that amount. So this is happening as a leverage. You give some part of the money, the state has to put in some other part. And so far, Amrut 1 is a water supply scheme. That was around $10 billion, okay, last time. Now this is, Amrut 2.0 is a $30 billion scheme. So far, we have approved 1.5 lakh crore worth of projects for only water supply. We have laid so much of pipeline and sewerage capacity. We have 22,000 MLD treatment and we are adding another 6,000 MLD right now. The works are on. And another 5,000 MLD. So infrastructure wise we have, but I am not worried so much about the hardware. I think cities are about softwares which need to go into it. Now how do we attend to, where are we? Today I find that, for example, if you have to do a DPR, the consultants are still, India is existing in several ages, right? You find the consultants also in that manner only. You find the experts are also in that manner only. Nobody is thinking contemporarily, okay? You have to think if the water pipeline can take the fiber, why not? You have to think, why should you have a STP? Why can't we have a pipeline which will release based on AI-based, this thing, microbes, where it has to release in-house and finish it off there? You have to think very differently. If your Nala is flowing and everybody is saying Nala Kala hai, Nala Kala, you go and see in Assam, you go and see in Goa, there are startups. You dose it with enzymes. The same Nala is converting itself into at least not non-odor water bodies and with a higher BOD, with a higher, oxygen, dissolved oxygen. So I think all these solutions have to be onboarded. There is a startup which has just did a bypass for the bores in Latur and 20 crore liter of water could be harvested. I think we need to have a complete open government where we onboard technologies. Tender method should be re-looked at. And we need to get these technologies, entry barriers should be removed. And that will lead to a lot of new things which will come in. And I have a lot of hope. I think I have so many points, but I just wanted to say only one thing. Economic master plans are super important. And we have this time in that 15,000 crore said that your trade areas and economic activity areas have to be looked at. Your water, blue-green infrastructure has to be looked at. That is important part of it. All that has been said, and there's a lot of activity. So I'm very positive, though I think we have to multiply this several times to reach where we have to reach. I think citizen is not bothered about who is giving it. Citizen, and one more thing is citizen participation, participatory governance. Your own city, Bangalore. I think you must have talked to the municipal commissioner of Bangalore. He said, I was very keen on putting to know which projects will be liked by the citizens to be implemented first and foremost. And he put it on website. And he said after 6 months also there was no response. So let us not assume that everybody is, and websites are not the visited ones. I'm sorry, ma'am, you should not put anything on the websites. Websites are visited by the people who want information, but not by the citizens. It is the WhatsApp or social media where citizens quickly see it, and it's fraction of a second they see it. I agree with you that a lot of things have gone wrong in terms of how we approached it for so many years, but now there is an awareness even at the city level and citizen level. I must say at least 1,000 odd cities have shown increase in their property tax collection, because that is a fundamental conditionality of FC and Amrut fund release and Swachh Bharat fund release. They have shown increase and real increase. But still, the bases are very low. We need to go a little far. I only want to say, with all that I heard, there is hope. There is not, we should not lose hope. At this point of time, there's no way that we can lose hope. We can't afford. And there's so much of energy in this sector. We just need to put, I mean, nothing changes the way we operate. There's so much innovation going on. We just need to onboard them. And we are onboarding them openly. We support without tender, even the startups and new technologies. Thank you so much. There's so much to say, but I think time is up.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, we have massively overshot our time. So very quickly, let me just, because you started off with many of these solutions, and Gujarat in particular has been a standout state, be it municipal bonds. I think Gujarat was the first one to have municipal bonds. So there's no denying that Gujarat in particular, that particular state's experience is very different from perhaps many other states. But let me just go around, and because you've mentioned the solutions, and that was the second part that I wanted to focus on, starting with Dr. Kundu, on what are the solutions specific that you think we need? Because, you know, it is one thing to say that the center is trying the best that they can, and that there are improvements, but as the various presentations have shown, that there are genuine big issues still there. How do you see this panning out? Where do you think the solutions lie?
I think if we understand what our additional secretary has just now mentioned, that there are solutions coming up in various cities and states. And I go back again to Gujarat. I think Gujarat has a very good model of regional commissioners. So when we have this dearth of officers to really take care of small towns, what Gujarat has done, Gujarat has brought in the regional commissioners. So a group of 15, 20, 25 small towns are under one regional commissioner. So maybe that model could be replicated in other states. Again, if you look at Orissa as a state, I think Orissa has given land patta to the people where they are, the Jaga mission, and it has worked really well. During times of COVID, it came up with the Mukta mission, which is again giving employment, 100 days of employment to the people in urban areas. So I think things like that need to be talked about more. More cities should understand like why things have worked there. If Jaga Mission has worked in Orissa, why can't it work in any other state? So the problem of slums and the recognition of the third tier, they have gone beyond that, recognizing slums as the fourth tier of governance. So I think things like that need to be really imbibed in our society and in the urban space. And there are a lot more, but in the paucity of time, I'm not going into the details. Thank you.
Mr. Sankhe, what would you...
It's a big topic. I know we have only a few minutes left. So as I mentioned, there are three, it's a tripod of funding, planning, and governance. I'll come to governance last, even though that's the main topic of this discussion. On funding, I think we brought those topics. I'll just throw some numbers. Okay. So we had calculated it was 1.2 trillion of capex for entire urban India, so around 50 billion per year, and 1 trillion in OPEX. Okay. So the OPEX part is generally ignored, but what we found is that the property tax and user charges can cover the OPEX, but not the capex. Okay. So therefore, the capex has to come from two sources. One is land monetization that you talked about. Very, very important. Singapore built its entire affordable housing on land monetization. China did that. Okay. And there are many examples. The town planning scheme of Gujarat or the BKC complex of Mumbai, Maharashtra, that is actually funding. So land monetization and a direct devolution of taxes. I think if we are looking at India for the next 25 years. Okay, so I can always give up to say ye to hone wala nahi hai. But if we look at it for the next 25 years, can cities get 20-25% of their GST directly allocated? China gives 25% of VAT. US has state and city taxes, right? UK gives 70% on a formula-based, of London's funding in a formula-based way. There is devolution, direct devolution of funding to cities everywhere in the world, okay, almost everywhere. I think India is probably one of the very few countries. And we understand the issue is what you mentioned, state and state finance commission and inability to allocate that. But with land monetization and state, the direct devolution, I think while there will be lots of sources, lots of solutions that will come out, I think these are the two structural reforms that need to be done on the funding side. On the planning side, I think we already talked about this is one single deficit, and I know, Shrikant, your organization has also done a lot of work, but I do feel that a 5, 10, 20-year master plans of economic plus physical, with the spatial planning associated with it, with the town planning rules and the FSI rules, I think could go a long way. We have seen, and the land monetization also actually comes out of that planning, because your base FSI is 1, you can say you can get up to 5 depending on XYZ parameters, and you pay the government a certain amount of money. So actually planning and funding are closely related, and I think that the current plan of getting economic master plans done is a step in the right direction. But again, I find that if it's maybe little still ad hoc, some states, some cities are coming up and some cities are not, it should be again made structural, right? And it's not as difficult problem, even though capacity problem is real. But the India that can send a vehicle to Mars, I'm sure, is capable of doing a master planning of a city, right? The third one is, of course, the governance part. Here again, I can be very practical and say, in the current context, what can we do? I think in the practical way, I think the metropolitan, that regional structure that you talked about is something that we can do currently. Whether it's a divisional commissioner or a metropolitan commissioner, I will leave it to the states. I think most of the larger cities then can cover much larger area. MMR, for example, Mumbai metropolitan area is a 5,000-6,000 square kilometer area that they can master plan. Unfortunately, the right town planning rules have not been made so that that plan actually has statutory relevance, right? Long term, I do feel that we need to go towards metropolitan mayor, again for the 25 years perspective. I think metropolitan mayor and also the municipal mayor, okay, empowered. How, what, I don't know, because I think the state, there's no incentive, somebody talked about it, no incentives, no political economy to do that. In fact, one chief minister of Maharashtra told me that Mumbai's mayor will be more powerful than the chief minister of Maharashtra, so there's no way he will let it happen, right? So therefore, it is the states that are pushing. I don't know whether there's a way of really incentivization through the center, but that's the part of the metropolitan level and also municipal level as a empowered mayor plus what we call corporatized agencies. Nobody talked about the structure below the commissioner, but we have seen great results by corporatized agency. BEST is an example, right? You need a corporatized agencies for road, water, and so on. Many other countries have planned it. It seems far away, at least for tier 1, tier 2 cities, it makes sense. Tier 3, tier 4 are very different. You can't have corporatized agency, no capacity. So that's the sort of the structural push. Otherwise, I agree that many good things are happening, especially pushed by the central schemes. But the state needs to, and there is a desire on the part of the states, but this needs to be really structural if you want to say a developed India of 30 trillion economy by 2047. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Rao, how do we solve the birth defect, the incentives problem that you mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. It's been quite an interesting discussion. A job of the economist is to identify what the basic issues are. That's what I was trying to do. There is a birth defect. Within that, whether we can improve to an extent, we can certainly improve to an extent, but the birth defect is flagged for the reason that much of the solutions that come out will be suboptimal. You need to, or it will take quite considerable amount of time before you get into an optimal solution. We can sidestep them. Some of them you can, but not all of them. A state level politician would not like a local politician. He would always like to interfere with the local sort of issues. That is the reason why, as he said, that mayor will not be an important person, municipal commissioner will be known. This is always the case. You ask how many people, many of the, even this thing, who is the mayor, people wouldn't know. Municipal commissioner is a day-to-day man. So they know it. Now, one of the things that we need to do is, as I said, as far, in the financing part of it, let me come to, there are infrastructure issues, there are basic local public goods provisions, the day-to-day related expenditures. Now, obviously, we'll have to have sufficient resource certainty. There has to be some certainty with regard to the running expenses. Capital expenditure, he did mention about land monetization. I think any monetization that happens, state will take away. Mumbai is a very special case because they have, floor space index and transferable development rights. They make huge amount of money with that. In fact, Mumbai municipal corporation is more richer than Maharashtra government. And in fact, with that, they actually finance a part of the slum development and a whole lot of other things. But that's not the case. Even if you go to Maharashtra, when you see, when the GST was imposed, when the state governments had to be given an assurance that 14% growth in their, the revenue will be ensured, the government, they will compensate. As far as octroi is concerned, they said only 4%. This is a fact of life. They only 4%. Growth of octroi is 4%, or the municipal corporation, Bombay, will get 4%. I'm not saying that continuation of octroi. No, I'm one of those persons who has always said that, this is an impediment to, it has a whole lot of problems. In fact, years ago, I wrote a small monograph on Gujarat at the request of Gujarat government at that time. It's called entry tax as a substitute for Gujarat. But anyway, that's for entry tax. So I think running expenses, there has to be certainty. As far as capital expenditure is concerned, there has to be a mechanism. Centrally sponsored schemes can be useful. But much of the thing that has happened is that central government's direct intervention, not even the centrally sponsored schemes. There are serious problems with the centrally sponsored schemes. Any specific purpose transfer you are talking about, my theory tells me, is to ensure a minimum standard of service. And in none of the cases in the centrally sponsored schemes, minimum standard is not defined. Even if you take Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, there are 28 different interventions within Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. And, which basically means you don't know what you are really trying to ensure. You are giving money, that's okay. But then there has to be, a minimum standard of service ensuring that. Unlike in the case of a general purpose transfer, which is enabling a state to provide a comparable level of service at comparable tax effort. That's what my theory is. But anyway, so here I think central government direct spending has helped through the state, whatever be the case. That's basically central sector schemes. Centrally sponsored schemes need to be cleaned up. They can be done. There's a lot of things that can be, improvement that can be done. But more important that I think we will have to develop a municipal bond market. I mean, we will have to do it. Gujarat has done to some extent. Initially, when the Surat, you had the problem, they did that. But thereafterwards, they had a huge problem of plague and things like that. That's the time they did it. But then municipal bond market development, which means you have to escrow, which basically implies that you have to escrow some revenue source, which basically implies that you have to develop capacity and this thing improve the property tax system. Capacity building at all levels, including tax levels, is the most important thing. We can do better than that. We need to do better than what we have today. There are some states which are doing better. There are many states which are not doing that better. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll bucket into three categories, and I'm not conflating short, medium, and long term, just restricting myself to short and medium term. And I'm calling out things which give me hope and which I think can realistically happen in the next few years. One is street and public space design standards, which is how should our streets and public spaces be? Not in terms of a vision, but in terms of DPRs, drawings, standards, and getting the job done. I think we are increasingly seeing examples of that. While we figured out national highways at scale, we've not figured out urban roads and public spaces. So that we ourselves do some work on that area. I think that's an area which will see massive catalytic impact, right? 10x impact on various aspects of equity, economy, and environment. And I see a lot of hope there. Second is unlocking pension and insurance monies, right? There's been a significant increase in insurance and pension assets under management in India. But there's been some growth in the municipal bond issuances, but they've actually been one-off issuances, even as incentives, etc., are being rolled out. But the ability to pool and match projects to these large assets under management is not easy, is possible. India has done it in other sectors. If you're able to crack it in this, that's the only way you'll find the capex, right? That's required for this massive influx across categories of cities. And for example, a few years ago, the utilization of the 15% cap for investment of insurance AUM in infrastructure securities was utilized only to the extent of 50%, simply because rated securities were not available. But India's markets have matured. You have sovereign wealth funds or quasi-sovereign wealth funds like NIF, etc. We have the ability to do this. Next is procurement reforms. I think that will massively impact the quality of our infrastructure and services, and also the time cycle needed to actually convert increased throughput in finances into outputs and outcomes for citizens. That's, in fact, I believe many government leaders who are progressive are themselves victims of procurement reforms. And accompanied by radical transparency in public finances, we are seeing many state-level bureaucrats complain that they don't have visibility over where the funds are coming from, where they are going, how to measure the journey of the rupee from its origin to its output and outcome. So that I think is easily doable with the kind of technology we have. So that's on the slightly harder pieces. And combined with this, I'd say we can't give freebies to our larger cities. The larger cities have economies the size of countries, and they are capable of generating financial resources on their own. So I feel that we should double down on large tranches of money against outcomes. They could be air quality, they could be water, etc. And the smaller cities need more untied grants. That's on the harder pieces. On the softer pieces, I'd say the women's self-help group movement and the fact that women councillors constitute 46% of India's elected councils. Imagine, compare that to the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha numbers. This is constitutional and statutory. 46% of India's cities have women councillors. That gives me a lot of hope. If we empower them and enable them, you'll see different resource allocations happening at the neighborhood level. I'd also say civic technology. A lot of the technology in the Indian context has been used on the supply side, but use of civic technology to connect citizens to each other, to elected officials and ward level officials for hyper-local change. That gives me hope. I'd say elections need to be held on time for councils. And the mayor's tenure has to be coterminous with that of the council, rather than 1 year, 2.5 years, etc. Two other things in terms of positioning, I'd say it's very important. India would need to focus disproportionate attention on equity, which is migrants and the urban poor, so that inequity doesn't kind of impact us adversely even as economic growth and urbanization takes off. Strategically, I would center public health, environment, jobs, livelihoods, and equity. as the center point of the strategy for the city, and therefore even conversations on devolution, infrastructure, etc., oriented towards saying what are the public health outcomes, what are the equity outcomes, what are the environment outcomes, and jobs and livelihood outcomes. The last thing I'd say is always we are confronted by state capacities. I don't believe India has the fiscal headroom or the human resources to build capacity city by city by city. We may not even have the necessity, given technology. Therefore, a clustered approach to building capacities, taking advantage of India's spatial pattern of urbanization. Our study shows that if you look at a 60-kilometer radius around our lakh plus cities, which are only 500 in number, we'll cover 92% of India's urban population. So a combination of big, bold bets, innovations, and partnership where India's growth will be state-led, but it cannot only be the state. We need a more equitable partnership between state, market, and civil society.
Right.
Thanks.
Right. Ma'am, last word to you.
Yeah, I think we are talking about metropolitan governance, we are talking about everything. I think what is more important is, see, if you give one structure and ask every state to, align to it in terms of structure, it has never happened. Metropolitan Planning Council is a telling example. You cannot have that. So I think we have to go there and meet the context and have the solution emerge from the context of asking for outcomes. We just need to say, ye chahiye. This is the outcome we want. As far as the centrally sponsored schemes are concerned, I think we are now focusing on outcomes. How many wards, which are the households which are getting water? Which are the households where from you are collecting the kachra? Which are the households which are getting, sewer connection, and whether it is covered to, connected to the STPs. India will have a major challenge of establishing honest functioning at the cutting edge level. When I say honest, it doesn't mean corruption or anything. It is more of a awareness as to building big STP cement tanks will not lead to treatment of the sewage. It is the microorganisms which have to be taken care of on a day-to-day basis. This awareness and this sensitivity has to be brought in to a great extent. That is where we need to focus our energies. So outcomes are going to be very important. If we ask for outcomes and ask the cities to align towards those outcomes, there are results coming. Okay, that's the first thing. And today you are able to do it because you have the technology. You can measure everything, you can see everything, and there are archaic methods of functioning. They have to be revolutionized and modernized. The second thing is funds. See, funds we can augment. Bonds are the most complex form of funds, municipal bonds. That is why you will not see many cities going for it. It is better to even get into an InvIT model. See, you don't ask for money to do things. You ask for money for which has worked. That will be a better model for cities to look at. For example, a recycling of wastewater. Can't we look at already functioning project in an InvIT model to raise money? Then that can be untied. It can go into something else because investors are safe. When I say this, they say, oh, these are very small projects. We need some 1,000 crores, 200 crores, 300 crores, 10-15 crores. So I think even the investors have to little scale down their levels. Whereas the third thing which I would say is, I think national level has a lot of role to play now. From the state subject part of it, state subject is fine. But we can have, we are not the people who have thought leadership. I can tell you that much. It is the states which are thought leaders. I'm not talking only from Gujarat perspective. I am saying there is something which works. The example is if a citizen also gains wealth, then he participates. Urban participatory governance will not be like rural participatory governance. किसी के पास time नहीं है कि, see, agriculture gives you some time. Whereas an urban life doesn't give you that time. So how do you participate? By paying taxes, by participating in town planning schemes, by participating in creation of assets, by participating in traveling in a transit. So the way the participation of an urban citizen will be have to be defined and followed it up. And I can only tell you that if we are able to, today I can tell you that Assam is able to do much more projects than it was doing. Uttar Pradesh is doing much more projects than it was doing. So I think the only way we will learn is by doing, and we need to look at open governance. So we need to look at people, civil society. It's not, I don't think if you're aligning them to a project or to a task, then it's not about equity, equality. It is about, and universalization of services is very important. Don't look at anything, whether it is a slum or whether it is this thing. Universally, everybody should get that service. So I think these are the broad principles we need to work on. Urban planning, innovative urban planning. Urban planning as it is seen as GIS-based master plans which are in the shelf, it is not being used. I've heard too much of this when I came here. I think I agree with you, it all happens. But this is the problem, you have to sort it out. And sorting out, we can. If we onboard a lot of stakeholders and align them towards outcomes which is required, instead of going this thing, money is there. Money will come. Once cities show, and again, municipal bond is a classic case, where raising municipal bonds was a big achievement. I don't think that was a big achievement. Ghaziabad raised bonds, but the project got into trouble. Next time they can't raise bonds. So they have to complete their project. So we have to look at the capability of taking it to a logical conclusion. Sometimes in our own enthusiasm, we start talking wrongly that these many cities raised bonds. That is okay for us to say as government, because we were incentivizing. But then after raising bonds, what happened? So, I mean, second form of bond. So these are the things which we need to look at really. We should not look at structures and processes. We should define the outcomes and allow people to align to those outcomes as per their context and their need. That will work. But we have to ask two questions. One is, what is your ecosystem service position of the cities? And competition is a big way to mobilize. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is a very good example of how a competitive spirit can lead to certain amount of awareness among the citizens and cities to align themselves to a goal. Again, there's a lot of technology which has to come in to reach out to complete conversion and so on and so forth. But I think we have hope and we have the wherewithal. We need to just exert a bit and make it more systematic. I agree to go there. And it all needs everybody's hand here to put it together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So I think there's been much to unpack, a lot of points being made. Let me hand it back to the compere and take it from there.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Our gratitude to all our panelists for helping us decode this very important topic and sharing their expertise with all of us here. And I'm sure that everyone here had a lot of learnings from here. And now I would request Ms. Shilpa Kumar, partner, Omidyar Network India, to kindly come and present the vote of thanks. A humble request, ma'am, that since we are already running short of time, so I request you to kindly be crisp and quick. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. It was really a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Udit. Let me, of course, keep it very brief as requested and say that to us, cities, when we think about cities, in a sense, it's kind of looking at it as a trinity. One is, of course, cities as economic drivers of growth and really important from both the city's perspective and the country's perspective, but also when you look at it from every individual which stays in the city. For each person, it is something they look at for ease of livelihood, for ease of earning their livelihood, and also for ease of living in the city. And both are really important from a very personal kind of point of view. As we saw in COVID, and in times of distress, it's really maybe people who are least able to protect themselves, who sometimes suffer the vagaries of these risks much more. And therefore, just borrowing a term from financial markets, where we often talk of the impossible trinity, I guess the question here is the trinity of cities growing, but each individual having ease of living and ease of livelihood. And then the third element of the trinity being staying in a kind of positive association with the environment. Because in the end, the trinity is the environment, the city, and the people that live in it. And as we've seen that if there is growth, in the end, you might meet one or two of those conditions. You might have livelihoods increasing, you might have cities growing, but you might not have sustainable, resilient cities, which are in the end necessary for all of us. The other big takeaway, and just summarizing very briefly, is that as we think about cities of the future, I think the big takeaway was these are large entities, these are complex entities, and these are entities which necessarily have to be built over many years, if not decades. I mean, we do say Rome was not built in a day, but really cities of the future need more than many years of planning. And just what I heard, I mean, I think it's all people who are part of the urban ecosystem, but what we heard is really maybe 4 big things, and that's really how do you identify the units of governance when we think of cities. The reality itself is that cities today, maybe we are not even counting them right, was one big takeaway. And also the fact that as we think about governance in the cities, what is an ideal unit? It's something worth thinking about. The second is really the policies, the processes, and the people involved in governing our cities. And how do we think of each part of these? The third was really on resources, a very important question of recurring resources. Like any good organization, if your recurring resources are not adequate, how do you keep planning as we need for the future? But to that, I'd also like to add that there are structures today available for cities to access funding, and can we also look at cities to think about these, take the help they need, to look at resources outside of their own resources, and to use them in ways that can augment the city structure. Last of all, what Shrikant, you said was first mile governance, which is that in the end, it is about neighborhoods, it is about people who live in cities, and it is about how do they make their aspirations and what the city is providing, both of these things, how do they meet? And much to do again on that front, and thank you for all your comments on it, and really appreciate it. Look forward to many more conversations where a lot of this can be unpacked. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kumar. We are delighted to have you also here this evening, and we extend our heartfelt gratitude and thanks to all our esteemed guests who have made this evening so successful for all of us. And as we wrap up, I'll take your leave and request you all to kindly join us for the high tea. Thank you so much, everyone.